Hello, wonderful friends. This is Rachel Archelaus of the Intuitive Art Academy, and I'm here with Carrie Roldan, our certification coach.
Hello.
We are so happy to be here. Today, we're going to talk about resistance versus action. This was requested by Dale. Thank you, Dale. And I'm going to reframe it a little bit because I feel like it's not necessarily resistance versus action. It's really resistance versus inspiration, which then can lead to action. So we have a lot to talk about. My cat desperately wants to get out of this room. And so I'll let Carrie introduce herself a little bit more and I'll be right back.
Oh, this is so funny. It's funny because resistance can show up in all kinds of ways. And so I like that Dale asked resistance versus action because my guess is there's something that maybe, Dale, you were wanting to take action on or feeling like you needed to take action on and resisting doing that. But the truth is, right, we can take action in resistance and it doesn't help us. So I like the way that Rachel's framing this more about resistance versus inspiration. And the reason I'm saying this is because, or the reason I say resistance can show up in all kinds of forms is because resistance does show up in ways that you think that's not my internal stuff. That is clearly external stuff. And one of those ways that it shows up sometimes for me is in technology glitches. And so interesting that we're having this conversation.
Yes.
And Rachel and I have had a few technology glitches. And then at the beginning of the conversation, suddenly Rachel's cat needed to go, right? It's just funny how that happens. So I just wanted to point that out as we jump into the conversation.
That is super funny. I love that because that's one of the things in my notes today to talk about the seemingly magical quality of resistance and how it can try to stop us from growing because of momentum, not because there's some sign that we're not meant to do something. And I'll give you a great example just right off the bat. I've shared this so many times, but it's really a good story and it's one I love remembering. It's that for my whole life, basically, I've wanted the experience of tiny living. I used to, with my parents in the car, drive by the yards with the sheds, like for sale. And I'd be like, one day I'm going to live in a shed. And I was so excited about it. And then I found van life many years later. And so I pretty much stalked all the van life YouTube channels for years and just learned all about their conversions and what they were driving and where they were going and how they did it and how they lived and where they went to the bathroom and all of the things. Like I totally immersed myself. And then I knew after several years, okay, it's time for me to buy my van. And I even sold my car to buy a van because I really didn't want more than one vehicle. And anyway, I was looking and looking and looking for listings. It can be hard to find an already converted van. And so I found one finally after months. I'd had no car for like 2 months already as I was preparing. And I went to my first appointment to look at a van, and it was gigantic. It was so big. It was like lifted off the ground. It had that suspension. It had huge tires. It was over 10 feet tall. That's like twice my height. And I had never driven anything like that before. And when I got in it and drove it, like the steering was loose and it was just so unwieldy. And I was terrified. But it had everything on my wish list, including a bathroom. And it was already set up. Like it was the perfect opportunity. And my head was just saying, no, 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 because I was so afraid of it. But when I had a moment to ask my intuition, I did the yes, no technique, and I got the biggest yes of my life. And so if I took any of those no's as a sign from the universe that this wasn't meant for me, that it was too big, that it was too unwieldy, that I couldn't do it, that it was the wrong van, then I would have missed out on years of adventure and countless trips across the country and through Canada. And so, and it's funny because as I was leaving to go pay her, we had to go to the bank together. Somebody else was waiting there to buy it. And if I hadn't said yes in that very first moment, it would have been gone. And then later I sold it for double what I paid for it. So everything possible worked out in that van. And if I had taken any of that, like, terrifying stuff as a sign from the universe that it wasn't meant to be, I wouldn't have had it. So I had to deliberately check in to get my yes. My yes was not apparent. It was not present for me. I had to search for it. So that's kind of how resistance and inspiration works. Think of yourself as a faucet. You have to be open to receive inspiration, right? Inspiration is really communication from your higher self. Like that's your intuition. It's that communication, and it has to be open in order for you to receive it. So sometimes you have to go looking for it by doing intuitive art or doing the yes no technique. Because sometimes if we're just in a default situation, or if we're coming up against something we've never done before, or something that we have a belief about that we can't do or that's not right for us, then if we just go from that information, our resistance is going to win, and we're not accurately assessing the situation. So, does that all make sense?
It makes sense, and I love the story. I love that story. Um, and I love the rest of that story, right? Because it wasn't you had resistance. The van's name was Gertie,
Yes.
right? And you had no resistance to the idea of Gertie, right? But then when you met
Correct.
her and she was bigger and scarier, right? You had resistance to, oh crap, is this really the one? You checked in, you got a yes. That is when you took action, right? You didn't take action. So going back to Dale's question about resistance versus action, right? She took action because she was inspired. She was inspired to get a conversion van. She was inspired to um, explore van life. And even when she got to that moment where she was afraid, she checked in and then took inspired action. And I love that you said that inspiration. So that, well, I guess the moment of inspiration in the check-in, right, was that great big whole body yes. But we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about more resistance that came up along your journey with Gertie, right?
Yeah.
Like it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
like you just bought Gertie and then it was smooth sailing forever and ever, amen, right?
Yep. My resistance manifested in many more ways. Yeah. So basically, I didn't drive Gertie very much for the first 6 months because my beliefs about my capabilities were being shown to me. I was afraid to drive in the mountains with that beast of a vehicle because, holy cow, that's scary. And I lived in the mountains. So if I wanted to get out of my state of Arizona, uh, I have to drive through mountains. So I didn't drive it very much in the beginning. And then the first trip that I did take, I searched for hours and hours, no lie, on my computer, TripAdvisor, road trip routes, all these things. How do I get out of my state without going through the mountains? And there is a way, but I did not find it in that first trip. What happened was, because I was so paranoid, I attracted more resistance because I was in the closed valve. I was not allowing my higher self to guide me to the route that would have been best for me. What happened was, because I was so paranoid and trying to avoid something, which creates more resistance, I manifested a route that not only took me up mountains, but it was on the smallest highway possible. So it was actual switchbacks. Like, a dinky little highway in the middle of nowhere with switchbacks, and I was terrified. Is it going to make it up? Is it going to just stall? Is it what's going to happen to me? I'm really going to fall off the side of the mountain. And it didn't happen, obviously, and I got over my fear. But that's what happened because I was looking at it on the negative side. My vibration, my energy was of fear. And so I created more fear. So if I had been open, like I was on a next trip that I took, I would have realized and I would have had access to the fact that if I go south and over, I can go where there's no mountains. But I didn't have access to that because my momentum was in the fear, in the closed section. Does that make sense too? You're muted.
Yeah. So you started to talk about, right, we can think of it as ourselves as a faucet. And then using that story, I understand what you're saying, right? And this idea of if you were an open valve, you would have found the southern route, right? You would have found the route
Yeah.
that didn't take you through your fear. But you did go through your fear. And
Yeah.
so I want to ask a question about that, right? Because there's so much advice that says, you know, absolutely push yourself out of your comfort zone, do the thing that you're afraid of. Um, and I don't think that that's necessarily wrong advice all the time, right? So how
Yeah.
can we discern? So in that moment, right, you did the thing, you felt the fear and did it anyway. I'm guessing because you checked in and were inspired to go wherever you were going and saw that as your only route. But can you talk a little bit about that? Like this idea of is the only way past resistance through?
Right. So this is a really good time to talk about how resistance works so that you understand if if you need to push through or if there's an easier route. Because resistance works like, you know how we all have that image of the tiny, like little snowflake at the top of the mountain, but if it rolls down the mountain, it's going to become a big snow boulder. That's called momentum, right? So it's like tumbling down the mountain and it's gaining more snow. It's like attracting more snow and it's getting bigger and heavier and faster. I don't know if it's getting faster, right? Because of physics. Maybe it is. I'm not sure. Don't quote me there. But it's it's gaining on itself. It's growing. And that's momentum. And you can think of resistance like that. The more I struggled and toiled and tried to find a way out of the mountains, the more momentum that gained. My vibration focused there. I made that stronger. If you think about coloring in a circle, I was coloring it all in. It was opaque. It was very strong. And so that's why I found the craziest little route that I put myself in because I was so focused on that that it had a lot of momentum. It got really far down the mountain. And when you're in a place like that, when the momentum is so strong, like last time we talked about relationships, if you have for years been talking about your partner in a negative way and feeling like you're not into them anymore, the momentum's going to be really huge. You're not going to have a lot of options as of what to do. It's not like overnight you can just start and lovingly look at them and change your opinion, right? Because you are this big, massive snow boulder now. You can't just stop that thing, right? If you stopped it, even with like a steel plate or something, it's going to smash and like fly everywhere. So it's hard to change course when the momentum is really, really great. It's possible, but it's harder. And we've all felt that. It's hard to change your mind when you've been thinking a certain way for a really long time. But if you learn to be light about things, if you learn to be easy, if you learn to be less judgmental, if you learn to live in that open valve place, chances are you're going to have a lot less momentum in the negative. And even if you have one or two areas of your life where there is strong negative momentum, your positive momentum can carry you forward. Like, so in my life, um, in that Gertie situation, I'm a pretty happy person most of the time. Like, that was my big fear of driving in the mountains was present long before I got a van. And so there was already momentum about that in my life. And then you add a tall van and it multiplied. But since I had a pretty good driving force, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. I didn't have to pull over and cry. Like, I didn't stop and get paralyzed with fear. I was able to make it through and like laugh about it and have it be a good time. It wasn't debilitating. And for some people, it could have been, right? Um, so you just, you can start from wherever you are, but there are some circumstances where, let's take another example here. Do you have an example of like when
Yeah.
you had to push through fear?
Probably. I wasn't thinking about myself. I was thinking about a lot of the clients that I'm currently working with. They have a fear of doing a Facebook Live, right? They have a fear of showing up on live video. Um, and so so their resistance shows up in all kinds of different ways. Do you want, is that a good place to start?
Yes, totally good place to start. So we got to go back to the higher self now because your higher self is your satellite in the sky, right? It gets to see everything, every possible avenue of you getting what you want. A Facebook Live, um, when an Instagram Live, a YouTube channel, a radio show, those are all ways to be seen, but they're just specific strategies, right? It's not the end goal. Like, I don't want to become famous for my YouTube lives. I just want to be seen. It doesn't matter where. So your higher self is connected to you at all times. It knows your fears. It knows your resistance. It can see the whole map of like the red zones of where you don't want to go. And it also knows, okay, her ultimate goal is here. So it can plot for you how to get you there with the least amount of resistance triggering possible. And that's where I really feel like there's a whole lifestyle plan you can adapt here, which is keep yourself in the open valve position as much as you can. So that means feel good, feel relaxed, feel positive, feel optimistic, feel good about life. Do things that feel good. If you have an inspiration of taking a walk that would feel nice, or calling a friend, or offering something in your business, or calling a client that feels good. Those are all really key things because those advance you on your map to getting everything you want. It seems really simple because it is, because you are part of your higher self. It can see everything, and you are just moving forward bit by bit in a good place, in a happy, relaxed place. And if if you are about to approach a resistance zone, there's no way around it, like me in my van, right? You are so plugged in most of the time that you have access to your intuition, at least like I did. And like on the mountain, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to die. I'm going to be okay. This is terrible, but I'm all right. So you can more easily move ahead on your little board there. And so I don't think we need to do anything we don't want to do if we are putting some effort and attention into living a connected, open valve life. If you have no positive momentum going whatsoever, if you have no practice of living intuitively, right? If you're just neutral all the time or miserable all the time, right? You have that big snowball momentum going in the opposite direction of where you want to be, right? So if you're chronically unhappy or depressed and there's not a lot of positive momentum going for you, which means you don't feel good really any of the time, then it's going to feel like a lot of effort to start the train moving in the direction you want to go. And that's where I think that's the only case I see doing something you don't really want to do, because you don't want to do anything that's going to be good feeling, because your momentum's dragging you down that mountain on that big snow boulder, and you can ride it out if you want and crash on the bottom and then see where you are, right? They talk about that as rock bottom. Sometimes you have to get smashed into pieces in order to be like, oh, hey, that was a crazy ride. Let me choose something different now, right? So I would just recommend, if you're in that place or any place, start building up that positive momentum, your open valve state. Meditate 15 minutes a day. Just listen to white noise, right? It's not about clearing your mind. It's really just about feeling connection to your higher self. Not hard at all. And practice these things that we talk about on this channel, like do intuitive art. Just practice your connection. Practice knowing that you're a vibrational being, and do the things that feel good. It sounds so ridiculous, but just, if eating a sandwich right now feels good, eat a sandwich. If taking a walk to the mailbox feels good, do that. You know, if going to the store and buying a tank top feels good, do that. Like, that is your higher self moving you forward toward where you want to go. Nothing is frivolous.
I just want to ask for a show of hands. So I know I can't actually see you guys, but how many of us are finding that one of our biggest places of resistance is actually allowing ourselves to do what feels good, right?
I know.
So many of us, right? We need to retrain ourselves, to to trust the nudges, to trust what lights you up. This does bring me to a resistance conversation, Rachel, though, because every time we get on this conversation, I think about exercise, running, places where momentum is helpful, even eating
Mm-hmm.
right. So if you watch, you guys know I'm a runner. I run on the daily. I'm in the middle of 3 days off. So today was my third day of not running. And I can see that there's some momentum, right? Like there's some momentum in the not running. There's some momentum in the sleeping in after just 3 days, right? So tomorrow I'm asking myself, do I really want to run tomorrow? And here's where I get stuck is yes, and right? Like, do I really want to run for the long term? So this maybe is the same as the Facebook Live, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that the client who I'm talking about, they've checked in, right? They understand there's something in them that's about building their business using Facebook Lives, that it doesn't feel like a should or like a have to, but it feels like, oh, I'm excited about that strategy. But, and then they have their list of excuses, the thing that their resistance, right? Their
Mm-hmm.
resistance pile, just like you were like, I'm excited about going on a trip across the country with Gertie, but I can't get out of Arizona without going through the mountains. So I guess what I'm getting at is that kind of stuff. I mean, my answer is often intuitive art, right? My answer is I like to do show me what my life looks like if I do, show me what my life looks like if I don't, or oftentimes what's the best possible outcome of doing X, Y, or Z so that I can get myself inspired. I can go, okay, well, that looks pretty good. I'll go through the resistance. But I want to talk about that because that is like, I want to, but I don't want to, right? I
Mm-hmm.
want to be a runner, but I don't want to go running.
Yeah.
How do we address I want but I don't want?
So this is really common, right? And for this part of resistance, we need to bring up the idea of beliefs or contradictory thoughts. So I want to do this, but I have a belief that it's going to be hard, or I'm going to have to put in too much effort, or no one's going to watch it, or it's going to be ... And so we have this like butting of heads where the energy is not moving because it's canceling itself out, really, right? I want to, but boom, like nothing's moving. And so I take a more gentle approach when it comes to this. Just like I bought the van, yeah, I bought it, but I didn't drive it for 6 months, right? Like I didn't buy it to not drive it. I didn't even have another car. Like I walked everywhere. Luckily, I lived in a city, so it wasn't a big deal. But um, I was talking with a friend a couple weeks ago about how I wanted to I've wanted for a while now to take Intimate Alien out into nature, but I was afraid. I'm totally comfortable dressing up as her and stuff with people around, that I know, or doing a lot of things. But hiking alone with her in the wilderness, I was really hesitant about, and so I didn't have to make a decision right there. Oh, well, I just have to do it. I have to just push myself. That didn't feel good. And so that wasn't part of my open valve plan, right? I wasn't inspired to do it. And so what ended up happening was that I went to a bunch of places to, I wasn't planning on this helping me with that issue, but I was hiking in a couple different places, and I was like, oh, okay, so there's this many people here at this time, and that's not so bad. And so the objections on the objection list just kept getting crossed off over time. And that's what helped me move the energy forward there. See, my higher self knew what was on my objection list and put me in places that would knock them off. And so the energy was freed up so that I could do it. And I have done it. I think the video went up last week, and there's another one today, actually, on the Hello Love channel. So you don't have to worry about doing or not doing. That's not your job. Your job is to listen to your inspiration and trust that that's putting you in the perfect place. Your higher self knows the outcomes that you want. It knows what you are stashing vibrationally more than you do. You can't fathom what's in that pile that your higher self is leading you to. All you have to worry about is, am I open? Am I clear? Am I receiving? Which means you're feeling good and you're taking action on those inspirations. Sometimes inspirations don't call for action, right? But when they do, you're able to go. And that's the way to get out of your comfort zone without bashing yourself into a wall. And it has worked for me in so many ways that I just learned over time I'm never going to do something I don't want to do. And even if it's like with exercise, there could be still a part of me with an objection list, but I have more desire to actually do it. So you can still feel hesitant and have more energy in the desire pool, right? So then you just have to make up your mind like, all right, well, the desire is carrying me forward. I could be moving slower than I want to right now, but I'm still going to do it. And it's really a personal feeling that you have to gauge, like, okay, well, my body's moving me. I don't want to do it, but I'm moving anyway. Like that used to happen to me when I ran all the time. The first month was torture. I hated it. It was awful. And then all of a sudden I was putting my shoes on. I didn't even want to go, but I was just doing it. So, yeah. Is that what you wanted to know?
Well, yeah, it's reminding me actually of a conversation we had, gosh, I don't know how long ago, at least a year ago, about the Intuitive Art Academy and the method, right? And I remember one of our students just continually saying to us, this is so permissive. It's so permissive. And that's what you're really talking about, right? Is giving yourself permission to honor yourself, to honor your higher self, to listen, to be open, and to listen. I think there's an important word, which is willing, right? To be open and willing, to do what you're inspired to do, which is the action part, Dale, that you were talking about. But honestly, for me, it's often about not doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's about
Yeah.
not moving until I'm inspired to move. Um, and it's funny because, Rachel, you and I are in this conversation so much that it doesn't seem radical, right? We feel like
Mm-hmm.
we say the same thing over and over: relax, allow, do what feels good. And yet we're continuing to have these conversations because we're human, right? And yeah, so anyways, I just think that, I guess I just wanted to address that sometimes the resistance, or sometimes what I'm resisting, is not taking action, is not moving,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'll check in, and the answer is do nothing, or relax, or don't worry about it, Carrie, I've got this. And I have sometimes a lot of resistance to that. But I have a willingness to live by my intuition. So I don't know if that meant, you were talking about
Mm-hmm.
piles, right? Like I'm talking about, yeah, just willingness to stay open and to listen.
Yeah. I
I have
think,
something that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I just heard this, right? Most of us have heard what you resist persists.
Mm-hmm.
And I just heard this and I was like, oh, yeah, what you resist persists definitely is like a good little saying that it sticks in your ears. But I heard someone say, like, well, actually, that's crap. It doesn't just persist, it grows. I was
Well,
like,
it depends on how much focus you put on it, right? If you're
fair.
actively resisting something, like I was with driving in the mountains, I was working really hard to not drive in the mountains. That was my full attention. And so, yeah, it was growing. But if it was just something in the background, like let's say I don't eat meat, right? So, if I was offered meat, I would say no, I would resist it. But it's not something I have a big charge about, like it's not a big deal to me. I don't care if other people eat meat. I don't feel like it's a value judgment or anything. So that's something that's, not necessarily growing because I'm not super focused on it. I don't have judgments about it. So yeah, but that's like that saying is like what we were talking about with this. What we resist, if we're actively resisting something, we're making it grow. So yeah.
Which is interesting, right? If we're in the conversation about how to overcome your resistance,
Hmm.
right? The first step might be relax.
Yeah,
James has said that.
because it's as easy as this. When you are actively resisting something, where's your valve? It's closed. You don't feel good when you're resisting something. When you're bad mouthing a politician, when you're mad at regulations, when you're at the store and there's a line and you're mad about it, when you're upset in traffic, when you hear something, like any time you're not feeling good, even if you're right, even if you're right to be mad, but if you're spending time there, you're closed. And so you're wasting that moment. You're not wasting it. There's nothing wrong with that. But you're not here. Anytime you're here, you're not here. You can't be both at the same time. So even if it's like with me when I was like, no, 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 with my van shut off, like, holy cow, this is terrible. I had to steal a little bit of a moment to open up and ask. And then I probably went right back because I was scared and spending thousands of dollars. But that's how it works. It's that simple. You're either open or you're not. And it depends on how you feel, like, so that you can know. So if you're not feeling good, if you're not satisfied, you're closed and you can't hear what your higher self has to say. Now, you shouldn't be afraid of being mad, like, or upset. Don't be afraid of being closed. It's part of life. It's going to happen. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're having a bad day, It's fine. Let yourself have a bad day. Like, it's not a big deal. But I would just recommend putting more attention on cultivating your capacity to have a good day, a good life, a good outlook, a good mindset. And that is what's going to carry you forward. You're not going to bully yourself into achievement because you're not going to be happy when you get there. If you're not happy on the journey, you're not going to be happy at the destination. So just keep that in mind and try to be happy.
I love that. I've never heard, I always say you can't punish yourself into the reward, right? Like
Yeah.
you can't punish yourself into that like reward at the end. I love the way that you said that you can't bully yourself into achievement. And I just want to point out to everyone, you guys, intuitive art is such a powerful tool. You know, Rachel and I both live intuitively, do our best to live intuitively, right? Do our best to listen to our inner guidance and trust it and follow it. And there are times when both of us are resisting, right? Or we're in a place of mental struggle, right? And that's where intuitive art can be so powerful because you ask the question, you have the answer in front of you. The answer from your higher self. And I know I have found so much comfort. The time in my life where I just kept going back to the drawing and remembering was actually I had huge resistance about buying this house. I didn't think that the moving was right. I didn't think that the financial commitment was right. Like I had huge resistance around that. I had a commitment to living intuitively, and my higher self really took me on the path of least resistance, which was the it. I kept telling myself, "Sure, I'll go look at houses with you. Sure, I'll like." Knowing the whole time my higher self isn't going to move me, right? Like I'll be easy on this path because I know I'm staying here. That was that was where I was on that whole journey. And then when it finally, I want to say push came to shove, like there did come a moment where um, the life I wanted and my desire to stay in my old house were like this. And I did a drawing. And I did that drawing we were talking about. Show me what my life looks like if I stay. Show me what my life looks like if I go. And both lives looked good. But the if I go life had more of what I was asking for in it. And so even though I still was afraid to trust, I still didn't know if it was a good financial commitment, right? Which is you going through the mountains. I
Mm-hmm.
still was like honestly secretly hoping for like escrow to fall through or like, you know what I mean? Or a buyer not to come to our house. Like even though all of that was going on, I could continue to to walk in faith because I had my hands on that drawing that said, this is what my life looks like. And that looked and felt like what I wanted. And that's where intuitive art can be so powerful, especially in resistance, right? If you can ask questions about what's on the other side of your resistance or what's my best path, or then in your moments where you're having trouble trusting yourself, you can hold that thing in your hand. I wish I had the drawing in my hands. You can hold that thing in your hand and look at it and remember the truth. And I did that over and over and over again. And now that we're here, I'm like, what was I so worried about? Right?
I know. That's the thing. It's like when we move beyond those limiting beliefs, like whatever's on the objection list, it's usually like, oh, okay, no big deal. And we find, I don't know, I just, it's a lifestyle. And the more you do it, the more you notice that, the easier it is to do it again and to just trust and let go so that the ride isn't so bumpy, right? So,
Well,
like,
then that's, oh,
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I say that's what I was going to say is what's come from that is that was a big scary thing for me. Like a lot of my resistance was around money and spending and yet I had this big asking for more and a bigger life and I wanted to keep that part of me small. And when I trusted, right, when I let go of that resistance, when I opened up my valve enough to be like, okay, show me how to get a bigger life, right? Show me. Um, I let a little bit in. And then as you let a little bit in, you can let a little bit more and a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more and a little bit more. To now, like I remember small, unexpected expenses used to send me on this crazy spiral and this like need to constrict. And I've really switched now where, and that making this commitment was a big part of that, right? But also just living incrementally this way is like now a small unexpected expense or a big unexpected expense is a reason for me to expand instead of
Mm-hmm.
contract. That didn't just happen because of one decision. Like when you were talking about the snowball coming down the mountain and you're like, you can't just stop it in a second. And then you're like, okay, maybe you could with the steel plate, right? But I had this vision of this big heavy snowball pressing on the steel plate, pressing on the steel plate until the steel plate fell over, right? Like it's
Yeah.
you and I think that's what so many of us do is like, well, I tried affirmations or I checked in one time or I, you know, you were talking about the partner. I thought about things I loved about him for 15 minutes and then he acted like a jerk again, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
so anyways, I feel like we say the same thing over and over again, but I wanted to use that as an example of when having intuitive art and something tangible is is a big step in shifting that momentum, in giving you those incremental wins, in trusting yourself, that then it gets easier and easier and easier to, the phrase I always like to use is behave like the person I really want to become. Because because I'm like 99.97% there in because there's momentum around trusting, basically.
Mm-hmm.
There's momentum between that connection with me and my high self.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point about like being the person that you want to become, each time you follow your intuition, you become more of that because you are letting go of naturally, like without effort, the old objection lists, right? For countless topics and things. You're actually elevating yourself above all of that mental chatter. When you're living in an inspired way, all of that yucky stuff isn't accessible to you because you're feeling good. A lot of the crap that we deal with in our minds every day lives in the bad feeling place, and vibrationally, they're very different. Like, how much more optimistic are you when you're feeling good? You're only focused on the good stuff, right? So, it's really worth it to put in a daily practice of getting there, getting your valve open, finding your happy place. And I have this list here of things that I like to do every day. So the meditation, the dreaming of just like, ooh, what am I creating? This is so fun. Positive aspects, basically like, what do I love about my life? What's already going great? What can I celebrate? Movement. So whether it's a walk or a run or yoga or hike, whatever it is, I try to at least move every day. And then alignment. So just reminding myself to be here, to feel good, to feel satisfied, that, any issue that comes up throughout the day is smaller than me. I can figure it out. There's always a solution present. I just, need to orient toward the solution. And intuitive art is often part of all of those steps, right? Like I have a drawing on my office wall telling me to have more structured movement in my day as a part of feeling worthy. And I have our income goal, and it has a lot of things on it like, read a book and, I won't get into the whole thing, but intuitive art can guide you because it's not really a linear path to do any of this, right? Like we said, it's kind of like a game board. It's going to go around your resistance in the easiest way possible. So it can be kind of hard to think about ahead of time. We really need to receive the directions. So that's where inspiration comes from. So I think we've talked about it, Carrie. I mean, I don't know what what else we could add, but if you have any questions, please let us know. We'd love to answer them or make you a separate video about it. And I really love this conversation because this can change your life. If you decide to live more intuitively, everything's decided for you. You just need to follow the impulses, and you're going to get so much farther than trying to figure things out in a mental loop in anxiety and fear. So we support you, we love you, and look to your intuitive art to answer your questions and ask these questions like, what will my life look like if, what if I don't, and get some more context on what you're dealing with. So share your drawings with us in our Facebook group. It's in facebook.com/groups/intuitive art academy. Visit us at intuitiveart.com. You can get this sweatshirt if you want it. And yeah, anything else, Carrie?
No, just leave a comment below. And also, I think if you've got specific stuff you want Rachel and I to talk about on these chats, right? We like having conversations around what you've got going on. So feel free to let us know.
Yeah. Have an amazing day, everybody, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.